Town Planning Board, February 3rd, 2016. We'll go over payroll first. We have payroll for Alan and Jane for 2/8 to 2/13, 2/15 to 2/20, 2/22 to 2/27, 2/29 to 3/5. Do I have a motion to accept the payroll as shown here?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We got some planning board bills. We got one from Graves Engineering for $3,600. The invoices are submitted. We have one from WB Mason for $79.99 with the invoices. We just have those two for now. Do I have a motion to accept the two bills as read?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We got some planning board correspondence. This is from the CMRPC bicycle parking program now available. The City of Worcester and Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission are pleased to announce the launch of a bike parking program for the Central Mass Regional CMRPC members, communities, and related public entities to be eligible for the program funding in February of 2016. Racks can be installed on public property such as libraries, town halls, schools, parks, etc. Municipalities may order bike racks through the approved bicycle parking vendors. For your convenience, the City of Worcester will put all of the instructions and request forms on the City of Worcester's website. Alan, any comment on that?
It's interesting. That seems to be a new program, and I just recommend the board might want to forward it to the selectmen because it's really not something we do. It came out of the regional agency, and everybody got it. But because it's public buildings, they might want to be aware of it and possibly consider something for some of the town public buildings.
Okay. So we'll have Alan send the selectmen a copy of this letter, see if they wish to do something with it. We've got a report from Mike Andre for the Jason property, which is 32 City Depot Road. You are proposing some drainage changes along the entrance driveway, which may include a subdrain and catch basin with the connections to the existing town drainage system on City Depot Road. We also understand that you are discussing with Jerry Foskett, Highway Superintendent, to lay out the process from here out. At this point, we will expect a professional engineered stamp drawing showing the proposed change. These drawings should be submitted to the planning board's office, copies of this email, as well to my office. We will review the plan and propose changes to determine if the work can be approved as a field change or required planning board approval through a public hearing. I guess they just want to do some drainage.
Yeah, under growth management tonight, I want to give you Michael's report and briefly go over the details with you. What they gave us as a drainage proposal, we rejected today. It's just insufficient. And I've asked Brendan Gove to get something to Michael by next week to review as a formal agenda item 2 weeks from tonight. I want him in here, get it over with. This is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're agreeable to that. And it'll be on the next agenda. But I wanted to give the board to take home this evening where we are right now in it in writing, and then we'll just take it from there in 2 weeks.
We do have another letter from Graves Engineering in regards to that project. It's basically the same thing. It just shows a bunch of pictures of what Graves has been inspecting for us. So I'd like to just pass these paperwork around for the boards to see. We have another Graves Engineering report in regards to Curtis Hill Solar Facility on site to inspect the progress of construction of a 2.0 megawatts ground-mounted array facility. During the site visit, I met with Mr. Binkley. The array racking and mounting systems are now 100% installed. All solar panels were delivered and are being stockpiled around the site. Approximately 10% of the solar panels have been installed, starting in the southern end work up to the north end section of array. Along the western side of the array, the access ways erosion control has been damaged in multiple locations. Again, he's accompanied his letter along with some pictures of the site. And we do have another Graves report. It's in regards to the Dresser Hill. GEI was on site for the project's progress site visit. Upon arriving, no contractors were on site. The detention basins still require loom, fine grading, sediment outlets, pipes, and FE1 outlet structures, and emergency spillway. In general, it appears that no site work has been conducted since the paving on November 13, 2015. Again, Graves has been nice enough to keep sending these letters with pictures for us to review. The Town of Oxford Planning Board, special notice of a special permit decision. January 28, 2016, BWS Stillwater River LLC, at 115 and 117 Kelly Street, Auburn, Mass, for access to parcel in Oxford land. Upon request for a special permit to allow a 4.0 megawatts AC ground-mounted solar energy installation. On January 11, 2016, the Oxford Planning Board granted the modifications of a special permit and site plan review and approved details. Again, another notice from the Town of Oxford, January 28, 2016, BWF French River LLC. The property affected is 115, 117 Kelly Street, Auburn, for proposed access. Let's see if this is, it's a different one, okay. Auburn, Mass, for access to proposal in Oxford, Mass, at 26 Maple Ave, North Oxford. Upon request of a special permit, applicant to modify a special permit under the previous of Chapter XX of the Oxford zoning bylaws to allow a 10.0 megawatts ground-mounted solar energy installation. On January 11, 2016, the Oxford Planning Board granted the modification of the special permit. Site plan review was approved. Another Oxford Zoning Board of Appeals, January 22nd, 2016. Viewpoint sign and awning on behalf of Pet Supply to request a special permit to allow Pet Supply Plus wall front sign of 142.41 square feet and sidewall signs of 46.5 square feet, greater size and numbers than allowed by section 6.5 of chapter signed by the Oxford zoning bylaws. Action taken, a special permit was granted for them. Town of Southbridge Planning Board, special permit granting authority. Planning Board will hold a public hearing on 2/17/2015 to consider the request to keep livestock at Amy Hogan's under 5.2.68 of the zoning bylaws at 288 Lambert Hill Road, accessor map 92, lot 37. So we have a town that's looking into livestock. Like, we've got it proposed. Okay. It's basically for correspondence, bills. It's about time for public hearing.
Continue the public hearing. Let Michael.
Being 7:15, I would Gonna open up the public hearing on the Griffin Road Solar LLC commercial site plan application. This time, Helen, do you have anything you want to say before
Thank you,
ask
Mr.
Michael?
Chairman. I'll spend a few minutes just summarizing where we are and giving you the latest Graves review, and then you can, talk to Michael and any attendees from the neighborhood. At the last session, 2 meetings ago, as you know, we went over the Graves review report, and there was a standard review report, information that they were recommending be added, items that were being redesigned. Most of it is always stormwater drainage on the site and such. And if I can give you Michael's review report from Waterman Design's revision plan, 4 in this direction, 2 in this direction. Mike's report is dated January 29th, and there were originally 18 comments from the previous submittal, and of the 18, as he reviewed it, 15 are complete in terms of what he was asking for or suggesting that they do. If I can briefly summarize the 3 that to be addressed this evening. Comment number 1, comment number 8, and comment number 14 are still outstanding. Comment number 1 is something to bring to the building commissioner's attendance. It's not a planning board site plan item. Michael's just pointing out under his first comment that it's still gray to him when he looks at the information they submitted on the northerly property line abutting a town-owned parcel, of exactly where that line is based title versus any field work. And he's suggesting that that be brought to the attention of the building commissioner in terms of prior to issuance of a building permit to satisfy the building commissioner that there is no proposed intrusion on the town-owned parcel that abuts it. And I think that's worthy. I mean, when you consider conditions of your vote, that can be a condition that you are forwarding that to the building commissioner's attention for him to review and make sure that it's accurate per his needs, to make sure he's not approving something that may spill over. Item number 8 is just vegetative buffer and fencing regarding Mrs. De Benedetto's property. He's only pointing out that that's an item for the board to determine this evening, which will continue that discussion and work with everybody on that. And item number 14 is standard in every project that he's just pointing out. They're required to do test pit locations for the drainage, and they haven't conducted the test pits, and 99 out of every 100 applicants don't do it at this stage. It's more of a reminder comment. We put a condition in any site plan approval by the board that prior to the issuance of any building permits, they'll complete under your engineer, Michael Andrade's field supervision, the test pit work, and that they'll just certify it in writing to the board and the building commissioner. So that's a summary of that. I defer to the board now to any questions to Mike, and then talk with Mrs. De Benedetto regarding fencing issues and anything else anyone wishes to bring up. But in terms of our civil engineering review, we're all set, subject to a few condition comments when you make a decision.
Okay. Mike, come on up.
Sure. Yeah, this is, for the record, Michael Scott, I'm an engineer at Waterman Design Associates. Ben Axelson from Nexan, and the landowner, Mr. Kissick, is here as well. This is the same plan we showed last meeting, which I think was a month ago. And there have been a couple minor changes, which I can explain. But I'd just like to talk quickly about the 3 comments that sort of carry over. I'm going to go in reverse order, if I may. So 14 was related to the test pits. We actually did include test pits in the original stormwater report, but they were performed by someone else. The Nexamp commissioned another GEI, coincidentally. They're a geotechnical, they're a national geotechnical company out of, the Boston area, the local office. And they did test pits and borings on the property, and that data was included in the original plans, and we added the locations. So I can clarify that with Mike Andrade, or we can do additional test pits if it's a need be. But
You can. He's just stating very clearly that test pits haven't been done.
we didn't
soil
perform
logs.
any, but the
Yeah.
geotech
Yeah,
did.
he may want you to do them over again, but
Okay.
we'll defer to whatever Michael needs
All right.
as our engineer.
We'll work that out.
Thank you.
Then, and when we were here last time, Ms. De Benedetto talked about the screening along the, what's the western line behind the rear of the property on Sullivan Road. We had originally shown a row of arborvitae similar to what had been approved at other sites, as well as the mandated 7-foot fence. The plans were revised to include an 8-foot fence in the section behind her home with privacy screening slats for several hundred feet, and that's annotated on specifically on sheet 203. So it's called out, I'm not gonna try to point it out too dramatically, but there's several hundred feet of fencing along this section of the site, again, behind her home. That's a planned revision, so we didn't change the vegetation call out, or the proposed vegetation, but we did change the fencing call out. And then lastly, probably the most complicated condition, and as you said, you're gonna defer to the building department, but just so everyone understands, the assessor's map shows that the town owns a piece of property between the northern portion of Mr. McKissick's property and the Mass Pike. And there was a taking deed for that many years back. It refers to a deed of 150 acres McKinstry land, of which apparently 5.5 acres were taken, but it doesn't specify where, excuse me, where of the 150 acres. So we're not contesting that the town takes this. We just have no way of knowing where the town took the 5.5 acres. There's no record, there's no plan, and there's no description of the taking. It refers to a greater parcel, but it doesn't say which portion of that parcel. So what we've done is we've struck a line across this portion of the property, left 5.5 acres idle. We're in the process of working with Nexamp and the title attorney to figure out if anyone.
I understand, I'm sure the building commissioner will just say, get a title attorney to review it and give me a report.
And we've been going through that process, so and we checked with the previous land surveyor who did the plan of land for the property, and they found the same thing. There's no evidence that the town took this piece, which is not to say the town didn't take something, but there's no evidence that that's what was taken. So we struck that line, we set aside 5.5 acres. It may be that he owns this piece and the town took it somewhere else, but that's where we're at on this, and we'll try to resolve that. And I think otherwise, the plan revisions in general were either related to drainage, as Alan had suggested earlier, some of the comments of DEP and the Concom. So Brian Waterman of our office is talking right now about, there's actually going to be a wetland replication area here, which wasn't part of the original plan. We added a sediment forebay to the inlet end of the detention basin, rerouted some pipes. But other than that, we haven't changed anything on the eastern array. This road moved a little bit this way at the request of Nexamp to provide a little more room for grading and make the site a little easier to work. But it only encroached another 15 or 20 feet into the buffer zone, and that's on the plans that we resubmitted, so it's being described. So in the end, the new drainage calculations, the new design that Graves reviewed, it was all captured. All those details were captured in the reports.
Still working with the solar farm on the bottom too?
Yes, this portion didn't change at all.
Okay.
So, because all the comments were related to either the crossing, the screening,
Yep.
or the drainage system. And this area over here is essentially all impervious today. So it's either a stockpile area or it's all been on. There's a tiny bit of tree work along Griffin Road where you see these dark lines. That's a steep slope. But otherwise, the site's already all cleared. So.
Any of the board members have questions for them at this time?
Quick question, Mike.
Yeah.
The basin is a detention basin,
Yes.
not an infiltration basin?
That's correct.
Alan, any comments that we should be aware of?
No, just you brought up the fencing, and I know the abutter was concerned about design specifics, asked which her.
All right. At this time, I'd like to open it again to the public, and I know there's one particular lady who's got some comments. If
Could I have the floor?
state your name and address, and
Could I have the floor, please?
sure. We're gonna go ahead. Yeah, I just need your name and address.
My name's Jeannie DiBenedetto. I live at 12 South Sullivan Road.
Yep.
Could everybody introduce themselves? I don't know who everyone is.
I'm the chairman of the board, Peter Stakis.
Patricia Vidlac.
Jane Vincent.
Ross Lemansky.
Carlton.
Okay.
Alan Gordon, I work for the planning board.
Okay.
Jane Gotti, the administrative
Okay.
assistant.
Thank you. I have some pictures. Now I want to give everybody one of these.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. There you go. I'll just read it, so you know you can read it later at your
Okay.
leisure.
Now, The comments that you're making here is in regards to the solar farm that's coming in?
Of course.
Okay.
First, I want to preface my questions, comments, and concerns with this. I'm heartbroken over the loss of the forest, which abuts my property, and sickened by the thought that the forest may never have a chance to recover due to the proposal laid out by the applicant. The applicant had originally told us that he had no plans to pursue anything more than logging on his land. This statement has revealed itself to be untrue, since Mr. McKissick has since told me that he is determined to exploit his land with whatever commercial industrial enterprise he is able to push through if the solar field is not accepted. I purchased my home in 1999 in large part for the aesthetic and natural beauty of the site and for the abundance of wildlife which the woods sustained. Now the wildlife is gone, the woods have been clear-cut, and to add insult to injury, I have been advised by a real estate agent that my property, if I were to try to sell it, would not draw the number of potential buyers as it would if a field of solar panels were not staring one in the face, an eyesore that would unfairly depreciate the value of my home. This leads me to a bewildering question. Why in the world is the portion of Mr. McKissick's land which directly abuts my residentially zoned land zoned industrial? South Sullivan Road is a residential street. There are no other commercial industrial enterprises on our street. I think to have a piece of land zoned industrial smack in the middle of the street is ridiculous. Ludicrous, really. Charlton already has at least 3 other solar arrays. How many more does the town need right now? A concern. Previously, the engineers noted a pooling of water which occurs at the spring and is situated towards the northern portion of my property close to the stone wall. They may not realize that a PVC pipe acting as a conduit for the spring snowmelt runs under my land, carries runoff from the once wooded forest, empties water into the street, which runs down the hill under my driveway and into the rain catch basin. Our road is rutted enough without the additional runoff which would be created by the complete absence of trees or vegetation which naturally absorb excess water. As you can see in one of those pictures, there's a picture of the road and its rutted condition now. The construction of a solar field would exacerbate this already existing problem. Do the engineers believe that they are going to be able to divert the snowmelt or heavy rains to run in an almost completely opposite direction towards the pond in the southeasterly portion of my property? A concern. What about the 2 feet of grading that was mentioned on January 6th? I have been informed that any grading of land on a hill could easily trigger a stormwater event, resulting in a possible mudslide, water in basements, additional pooling, which could become a small pond or lake running across my property. As I said before, without the natural ability of vegetation to absorb large quantities of water, spring could easily become a disaster. A concern. My family and friends and I myself spend a lot of time, spring, summer, and fall, outside enjoying my yard and patio. I consider my land an extension of my house. I am an avid gardener and spend the majority of my free time at home, outside on my patio or in my yards. My patio is only 15 feet from the stone wall which separates my property and the applicant's. As you can see in one of those pictures, my house is a mere 43 feet from his land, and that's the other picture. As the plans stand now, the solar field appears to begin just feet from the stone wall which divides our properties. Currently, there is no buffer or adequate shield to block my view of the proposed array or to dissipate the possible effects of the EMF radiation that solar arrays and inverters generate. Photovoltaic panels may contain hazardous materials, and there is the potential for environmental contamination if they were damaged or improperly disposed upon decommissioning. Concentrating solar power systems may employ materials such as oils or molten salts, hydraulic fluids, coolants, and lubricants that may be hazardous and present spill risks. Another major concern is my well. It is only 25 feet from the edge of the stone wall which divides our properties. My well is also directly in line with the spring runoff. What effect might construction or deconstruction of the array have on my drinking water? Is there a possibility of hazardous material leaching into my water supply? If not properly decommissioned, and if lead is used in soldering the solar modules, this hazardous material could also leach into the land and eventually into my water supply. I have also heard of nightmare scenarios where drilling during construction has cracked homeowners' foundations. If this project is approved by the town, I insist on a written guarantee that states that any damage done to my house or property during construction is solely the responsibility of the applicant. He is to repair or rectify any damaged property to its original state and to my satisfaction. This will also hold true for any subsequent damage done to my house or property as a direct result of construction or operation of the array during its lifetime or deconstruction of the array when its lifetime is spent. If this project is approved by the town, I insist on a 10-foot stockade dark brown fence, which will be bought and installed by the applicant, and which will run the entire length of my property that abuts Mr. McKissick's land, where the proposed array will be situated. In other words, the fence should run basically from the northerly edge of my property to the southeasterly edge of my property where the array ends. This fence will be installed on the applicant's land in front of the chain link fence, which will encircle the array. Also, in front of the stockade fence, I insist on a line of dark American 8-foot arborvitae trees, which will be bought and planted by the applicant and run the entire length of the stockade fence and be planted no more than 4 feet apart, so they will provide a tall and dense shield. The fence and trees should be maintained by the applicant throughout the life of the array, and new trees planted if the originals die. I strongly feel that viewing this array is not something that I or my neighbors should be forced to endure. I insist on a 10-foot fence because the engineers stated that the solar panels would range in height from 2 feet to 8 feet. If the panels achieve a greater height, I would insist on a taller fence, which would be 2 feet higher than the tallest panel installation. I would want the telephone number of a clerk of the works, i.e. a project engineer, etc., one person I can call at any time if I see anything suspicious, illegal, or contrary to plans during the construction. I would expect anything not on the up and up to be swiftly and satisfactorily dealt with. I would want the project to be closely monitored by an experienced person or panel of persons during the construction, lifetime, and deconstruction of the array. If this project is approved by the town, I insist that time constraints are put on the construction of this solar field. Work on the array should not commence before 7 a.m. and should end by 5 p.m. I also insist that no work at all is to be performed on weekends or holidays. South Sullivan Road is a quiet street, and families have a right to enjoy their yards and pools without the insult of noise and unsightly construction that this project would surely bring. I would insist that all of these concessions be put in writing and made legally binding and part of the plans. The close proximity of my home to this proposed site would be extremely intrusive and significantly diminish my enjoyment of my home, gardens, and yards, not to mention the devastating effect this project would have on my home's value and those of my neighbors. I do not see the necessity of so many panels to be installed so very close to my home. As the plans stand now, this array will constitute a looming and forbidding presence, which I will have to unfairly withstand for approximately 20 years. I realize that Mr. McKissick has his reasons for wanting to go ahead with this project at this time, but I would ask him to consider the negative and hurtful effect this plan would have on the residents of South Sullivan Road. I would ask him to consider possibly a less intrusive and more palatable solution to the development of his land in question. Respectfully submitted.
Alan, I'd like you to make some comments at the time, and I think the board members will have some comments too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to thank you for being so clear and detailed. I mean, it is sometimes people either wander or don't make clear what their points are, and it helps quite a bit for you to have put your thoughts in writing and to presented it. I'd like to just make 8 quick comments, and it was easy to be able to respond because what you put together was very informative. And I'll start with a few that I think fall very much within the planning board's purview, and then I'll just honestly say how a few things either aren't the planning board's purview, they're other people, and a few others are something we can't address. The first one is obviously the buffer, you know, the landscaping and the fence, and we can go into it, and the board can go into specific details and double check the location, but what the abutter is saying is very reasonable. You require fences. We usually defer to the abutter of the particular design. We talked at the last meeting about what Mr. Wolfenden came up with when on the one on Route 20, that in his particular case, he wanted a white vinyl 8 or 10 feet. We combine them sometimes with arborvitae, sometimes we don't. If you do put arborvitae here, we always, it's recommended by our engineer and their landscape people at the engineering office that it's about a 4-foot offset. We also recommend that the species of arborvitae be deer resistant, because deer eat these things, you know, that type of thing. And we always require a performance guarantee for a 12-month period, and you've provided that on your other 2 projects in town. One of your projects is about 400 arborvitae, it's Carbon Hill Road, and you've had a 1-year performance guarantee. So that type of thing, subject to the board a little later, just going over and double checking location, design, and all is within your purview and routine. Second, I'm just jumping around. The abutter's question about why is the land zoned industrial, I can only give you a general answer. It's from when the town first created the zoning map in 1987, and most of the Route 20 corridor is either completely industrial land, completely commercial, or in a few places like this, you have some pre-existing residential houses, and every community has a mixed area of industrial and residential along its major highway corridors. So that's the history of it. There are no other answers than explaining that that's how we evolved on that particular one. Regarding the contact information, that's also routine and applicable on the request. I think anybody who's interested from the neighborhood would receive at their request, they can have 3 phone numbers ultimately. The building commissioner, the planning board's engineering consultant who handles our field inspections, and questions from abutters on what's under our site plan review, which is drainage, stormwater management, driveway design, things like that. And also, as you did with Carpenter Hill Road, providing your clerk of the work, your engineer's numbers to anybody who requests it. It's pretty routine. Hours of operation, it's all state and local law under the building commissioner. I do know off the top of my head that you're not allowed to work on holidays and Sundays. I'm not sure about Saturdays unless someone knows from the board, but that's under the building commissioner anyway. And also hours Monday through Friday, again, are governed by state and local law through the building code. So that again isn't part of our review. Constructing, cracking homeowners' foundations, I guess I haven't seen so far in any of the other 13 that we've had any form of construction that leads to anything like that. But if there is anything, let me just finish my comment. If there's anything on homeowner foundations, if there were blasting, then it's through the fire department permitting and all of that. Other than that, I know that you're required to be insured, that if there's any civil damage to anybody, you're liable. But that's all I know about that, but you know. I think you got a question on that one.
Your question on that, what Alan just mentioned?
Yes, I have had a conversation with another town's planning board chair, and they had a situation where a solar farm construction crew was drilling and a homeowner's foundation was cracked. And I can get that in writing.
Yeah. It's not something that we manage or handle through us. If it happens, they're liable, and their insurance company would address it accordingly if you brought that to the building commissioner's attention. When we do have abutters that there is any type of damage on their property or their structures from a project, they go to the building commissioner, Kurt Meskis, and he then contacts the applicant under his building permit and then deals with remediation and fixing the problem.
I'm just saying that I don't want it to happen, period. It's a situation where this site is so close to my home that all of these things are magnified and could easily occur. And I don't want that to happen in the first place.
I believe Alan still has a couple more comments.
Okay.
I'll be as quick as possible. Well concerned, people bring up the same concern on all of our projects. We've had it with other solars and such. Any concern with the well is in terms of the Board of Health. If there's any issues, it's Board of Health. We found from asking our engineer in terms of stormwater management and runoff from the site, contaminating anybody's property or such, that under federal EPA, state DEP, and our local stormwater management, the site has to be designed to avoid any type of that type of runoff, and that's what our engineer reviews, and that's what he's saying. The hydrology of the stormwater management system is properly designed on paper, first of all, to avoid any type of runoff that would be of a negative impact to anybody, and two, our engineer will field inspect through the life of the construction to make sure that it's properly designed like that. Anything else would be Board of Health, but we have to design according to what our engineer reviews from them, and he's informing us that that's okay. If I can finish my comments, then I defer to anybody. The stormwater management in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph on the first page, again, is a valid concern, and again, that goes back to our engineer. Our engineer makes sure from the design and from the field construction that any pre-existing runoff problems and any potential ones do not happen. That's the goal under again, federal EPA, state DEP, and local regulations for stormwater management. That's the heart of what we review here, and our engineer stays on top of that. I'm almost done with my initial comments. Just want to double check. I think those are the only ones that jumped out at me, and I just wanted to either clarify or provide that information of what falls into us, what doesn't, and other people that may be able to help that we're just aware of, let's say building commissioner, that type of thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alan, I'd like you to comment on one thing.
Sure.
Solar farms.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just refresh the public's information again on that it isn't allowed practice?
Sure. And it's not passing the buck by saying this, it's the legal realities of planning and zoning in Massachusetts. We operate under a state law called Chapter 48 of the Zoning Act, and it gives parameters of what you can and can't do to local planning boards in their local bylaws. And there's something in there called the Section 3 exemption. About 25 years ago, whoever was the governor at that point in Massachusetts amended that section that basically you cannot ban in your community in any particular zone a handful of uses. And one of them is solar, because the state government is promoting solar as alternative energy. So in terms of why you allowing these, not just this one, but the other 13 you've approved so far, and we've got many more coming in, and every community is facing these across the state. You can only control through site plan review design layout. You can't deny them. You can't take particular zones even and say, well, in zones X, Y, and Z we allow them in our town, but zones A, B, and C we won't. Now, there are a handful of communities that have done that, and I've been told by the State Department of Housing and Community Development that the state is legally working with those communities. Rather than take them to court, the state is getting them to voluntarily change that, because it's not allowed and it's a violation. So that answers the general question of why do we allow these, and why are they allowed literally anywhere in town that an applicant can either buy land, lease land, find that it works for their purpose to operate it, and then do a general design layout that meets stormwater management as I've described it. And every community is going through the same thing. So it's not that our hands are tied to pass the buck, it's the legal realities of why these are popping up everywhere from near residences to nowhere near somebody across Charlton. And it's also tied to where the 3-phase electrical lines are from National Grid, which are prevalent in that part of town.
I have a question. Do any of you on the board have a solar field going in? You
I do. I got 2 of them in my backyard.
And have you found that talking to a real estate agent is going to depreciate the value of your home?
No.
Well, maybe you should.
I got 2 of them in my backyard. One's about a mile, less than a mile, and the other one's about a half a mile from my house.
This is going to be 43 feet from my house.
Well, you asked if any of us had them in our backyard.
Right. And
I
I'm
do.
saying, okay, there's a little bit of difference there. 43 feet, right in my face.
Okay.
And I've talked to a real estate agent, it's going to
Again,
extremely diminish
like Alan stated earlier, It's something that is granted. It's nothing we can do about that at the time. Does any of the board members have any other questions to ask? Or comments to the young lady? Carl?
Mike, can you, for the board's benefit and the public's benefit, sort of talk about stormwater, how it gets diverted, and what you designed for in terms of storms and where the water goes? And then, secondly, can you talk, or can you guys in general talk about what the panels are made of, in terms of materials, and what we're looking at in terms of environmental impacts, if any?
Just put in one comment before you talk to that.
No.
Because I'm gonna
Sure.
butter.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Carl has the floor at the moment. Keep your thoughts for a minute.
All right, I would defer to Ben for the second half of that. The first half of the question, this is the western part of the array, and Miss Di Benedetto's home is here at the bottom left. So, like on any site that we work on, we obviously look at where the water goes today, and the requirement is that there's no increase in runoff beyond the property, and that water be retained and infiltrated in some conditions, but in any case that the water be detained and let go at a rate and a volume that's similar to what's happening today. At this particular site, the land pretty much falls from the north to the south. There is a ridge that runs kind of through the center of the site, pretty much aimed right at the back of Miss Di Benedetto's home. So the western part of the site drains to Sullivan Road. Eastern part of the site drains to this large central wetland, which is, there's the small pond here that actually feeds the stream that's below the small pond. It never gets to Sullivan Road. In this case, what we've done is the lay of the land will essentially, the same ridge line is going to exist right here. So this amount of water running towards Sullivan will continue to go, or this amount of land will continue to go. But what we've done, because as Ms. Di Benedetto cited, when the trees come down, there's going to be less vegetation. And she also cited the small depression behind her home where there's a PVC pipe that drains out onto the street, which we saw. We've basically taken from where that small area is in the northern part of her lot, we've continued to swale behind her home, so on the other side of the wall from her home, and brought the water around to a detention basin that's on the other side of the ridge. So there's grading in there. I mean, it's not going to happen naturally. There's a cut, and there would be an earthen ditch rock line that would steer about this much of the site. This little piece on the northern end goes off in that direction. There's another low point that looks like it overtops Sullivan Road or soaks in another low point over here. That's going to be perpetuated. That flows to the other side of Sullivan Road. Sullivan has a crown or a crest right here, so water flows off that way and water flows this way. So we're going to take a bunch of that water and bring it around. The rest of it's going to continue going where it goes. And likewise on this side, rather than let all of this run directly to the wetland and create a problem down here, there's a ditch on the high side, or the west side of the driveway, this tan area. This is a rock line ditch that takes the water to the detention basin. So about 80+% of this site ends up being routed over in this direction. And again, because it's all vegetated, in the end it will be grass. It's not like it's a paved site. It's not like it's a parking lot or a building. So water is essentially steered around here, and because of the long travel path, that in and of itself slows water down, and then the more frequent storms, water is going to soak in just like it does today. In the larger storms, there will be some increase in runoff to the ditches, which then will steer to the pond to detain it and allow it to come out at a slower rate. And the outlet point is here on the plan, which puts it just outside the wetland area. And in the bigger picture, that's that same point. So the water is going to come out below the pond, which is below Sullivan Road, and the water will run around and then eventually under 20 as it does today.
Carl had a second part to his question about the panels.
Sure. So in terms of the composition of the panels that we use, like the panels that every other company in Massachusetts has been using, are silicon-based photovoltaic cells, which is, silicon is essentially sand, and it's, there's no harmful materials in them. There's nothing, toxic about in the panels or anything used in the manufacturing of the panels. Where there's information out there about other types of solar technologies, like thin film panels and concentrated solar solar thermal, which do have more toxic materials in them, but those are not what we're using here, both because we don't want to use panels with toxic materials, and also because it's more expensive. Since for the last 5 or 6 years, the cost of silicon panels have been so low that all the other forms of solar have pretty much gone under. And in terms of the radiation from the inverter, noise from the inverter, this has all been tested. I've got materials that I can provide the board that the state did a peer-reviewed survey looking at existing research on this and found that there's no harmful levels of EMF radiation or noise coming from the inverters themselves. I'd also like to point out that on our plans, the location of the inverters is basically nowhere near. Can you see it on here? Okay. The areas that we're proposing for the inverter pad are over here, near the access road, near the stream crossing, and far from any neighboring residences. And then for the smaller array, we're basically providing it right there.
And this inverter will be on the other side, as I described. There's a ridge, so you would actually go up and over. So there'll be about a 15-foot tall hill between Sullivan Road and that location. There is about 15-foot tall.
Okay. Gentleman in front, if you state your name and address,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, it's Jim Tessier. I live at 10 South Sullivan Road, so I'm our neighbor. Actually, if you don't mind, sir, can you flip back to the front picture? Most of the concerns that Gene had stated, I obviously have the same concerns, because I'm in a butter as well. So, although the array is not going to be completely in my backyard as it is hers, it's still right behind my house. And there's certain areas where right now there's no trees basically between my property and where the array is going to be. So the two comments I guess I just wanted to bring up is one on the fence, I think they proposed an 8-foot fence. Is as you said that's a pretty good grade back there. So an 8-foot fence down here, when you have solar panels that are going to be much higher than that, isn't going to help. And we have Cape houses that have, in my case, children living upstairs, looking right out my backyard windows, a clear view there. So if they're going to be facing us, I don't see how we're not going to have the glare going over an 8-foot fence.
I insisted on 10 foot in my speech, at least.
And I guess the other thing I'd like to just point out as we're talking about the stormwater runoff issues, as you can see in that picture, you can see my in-ground pool right about there, and that's not very far from where this is going to go. And I guess my concern is if we're making changes to the stormwater system here or any type of groundwater flow or anything, that could very much impact the land surrounding that pool. So I just want to point those couple things out right there.
Ross, you look like you have a question.
Mike, do you have a grading plan where it shows what the elevation grade is in the backyard as opposed to where the solar?
You can look at the pictures, how it goes up.
I don't know if we know.
Okay.
I can tell you what the street is. I mean, we surveyed. Yeah, we didn't get in front of there.
Okay.
But I do know, I can say
It slopes
anecdotally,
up.
and I think that all agree. Yeah, this is the high point in Sullivan, and the road drops down. And
Yeah.
from the road, this is pretty much. I mean, your lot's fairly flat.
Mike, which one is his lot? Can you just?
Sorry,
point to it,
Miss
please?
D. Benedetto's lot is fairly flat.
This is the one right just
This
down.
is the next one down. So it's quite a bit lower at the street, but the land does rise up. This is the ridge, and this is 730, and this is 690. So there's 40 feet from here to here. There's probably
Okay.
at least another 10 feet.
Correct.
Okay.
There's a good
Our
10 feet.
lands are flat and the arrays
All right, so you'll look
high.
up to it.
That's
Oh,
correct.
yeah.
If you looked at the pictures,
Yeah,
you could
no, I
see
saw that. I just wanted to confirm
It's
that.
way up.
They will be
Right.
looking up.
Yeah,
at
they'll look it up
I,
there.
I just have a quick question. Part of Mr. Bennett's property,
See, Benedetto.
D. Bennett property, goes in back of Mr. Tuff's property, correct?
Well, they
Yes.
kind of converge.
Yes, her property does go behind.
Goes behind you.
Correct.
So basically, it's your house, her property, and then the proposed project.
I would have no problem.
Yeah, I
I just want to
I
clear
would
up
have no
what
problem
houses
with
are.
Jim putting trees to block his view of it going, if it had to go
But
across
it's
my
not
land,
abutting
I
the
would
property,
have no problem
it's,
with that.
Yeah.
the trees are going along the back of her property, which is
Yeah.
also helping him.
Yeah.
But if Jim wants trees in back of his house, that to block his view from the angle that his house is at, I would have no problem having trees on my land back there
Yeah.
to help him.
At this time, I think we'll just discuss the, height of the fence and stuff.
Right.
One more question.
Sure, Hal.
Just for Jim's benefit, Mike, can you point out where that swale is and where Jim's house is?
Okay, that's Mr.
Yep,
Tessier's home.
Yep.
And the swale will start near the high point of Sullivan, but behind the wall on the other side of the property line. And it will run all the way to this point, so past, your pool's probably right about here. So even beyond where your pool is.
So the water coming off the hill gets intercepted by that swale.
That's correct, and it's brought
pushed
around.
that way.
That's correct. Yeah, everything's going this way.
Thanks.
If we get down to,
Please let the
Excuse me.
chairman recognize you.
oh, sorry.
Should be recognized before speaking. Go ahead.
If we get down to the nitty-gritty as far as details with the fence and the arborvitae's, what I stated in my letter, I believe Jim agrees with. And we want those specific trees, the dark American 8-foot arborvitae.
Again, for the sake of making progress, it's routine, that's not a problem. I mean, what I'd like to do is, can you just confirm, so there's no issue beyond this evening, of point to points where the fence and the arborvitae line begins and ends?
Well, on this, all right, what's presently proposed, actually, you can see this is the corner of Mr. Tessier's lot right here.
Mhm.
So we have it starting pretty much perpendicular to that
I'd like you
corner.
to take a marker from there and mark it for us, please.
Sure.
So we don't get into any issues, and we all confirm this evening. Thank you.
All right, so it's, what we've got is essentially, here's the corner of Mr. Tessier's property, so it's essentially, this is, that's, yeah.
There's a red one in there.
They could use this
Perfect,
one.
thank you.
So it's essentially along this reach, up to this corner in here, which is not behind.
Can you allow Mrs. De Benedetto to come up and confirm that's where she's talking about, please?
Sure.
Don't flip it, please, I need to look.
I was gonna look to see if I had the distance, but.
Just let, that way we're finalizing, so everyone's on the same page and understanding, point to point. We're
Yeah,
talking point to
understood.
point.
I just wanna look at it from this.
Yeah,
Orange marker.
which is similar.
Okay, first I have a question, what's this yellow line?
Yeah. No, get an orange
That's a
one.
question for
They're
the
like
board,
neon.
we didn't put it on there.
We're getting a neon orange marker, which we're gonna use right now.
Could you tell me what this yellow line means? I know the orange is the demarcation between my property and his, that's probably the stone wall.
Could you show it to me all? Well, all the yellow means is, I did that to just show the locations of the two array layouts, that's all it is.
All right, so how many feet from the stone wall would the arrays begin? Here.
Well, if we can take this, ma'am, let's take it item by item.
So
First,
this-
let's demarcate point to point.
That
Length.
area right there, and the reason I was flipping is it's shown on one of the sheets.
Is this the end of my property right here?
Yes. And your other end is way down here. But that's the corner with Mr. Tessier's property.
Okay, I would like it to come down a little bit further to block Jim's view this way. I would like it to come down to here, to the end of the array. That's what I insist on.
That fence
Down
won't
here,
block my view.
the fence to go all the way down here. To cover, now, I don't know, other people on the street might want the fence to go up this way.
We're only
Right.
dealing with who
Dealing
is
with you.
here, please.
Yeah.
We're dealing
That's-
with you.
That's it.
Yeah, just look back down there.
You wanna step in and
Yeah, we can.
All right, wait a minute, we're all getting out of the
Chairman,
end here.
finish the meeting.
I wanna try to keep this under control.
So you're looking for, so what we're talking about then,
So this is the beginning of my property, that's okay, but
Yeah.
so I want it to come down to the end of the array, and that's what I
which is
stated.
somewhere
Okay,
in
now,
there.
Yeah.
we go person by person. Now that Mrs. De Benedetto has done it, if there's anybody else who, let the chair recognize them, has the same concern and wants to talk about it for their property, Mr. Chairman, I'd
Yes.
recommend you recognize them one by one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mr. Taft,
I guess my
if you
only,
would come up to the
Sure.
drawing and just verify
Yeah,
where she
it's-
would like it to stop.
it's just again, if my house
Yep.
is here, if it's gonna end, it's gonna end right here, is
That's
what
what
you're
it's
saying.
presently shown.
I mean, there's, right here, it's complete empty, clear shot. There's no trees, there's nothing here. Like I said,
So you're
I
asking
can
for the
see-
fence to go down lower.
Yeah, just to go down
Door
low.
right there, to
That's
the end of the
what
array.
Miss even the
Correct.
damages that
Okay.
suggested.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, and I would agree.
Mark,
with
could
that.
you mark it, please?
Sure.
There we go.
Now, do we have anybody else in the audience who abuts this?
Yeah, my name is Keith Mayotte. I live 65 Moore Street, Southbridge, Mass. I just want to address the engineers for Jeannie DiBenedetto's property. Have you done the math to figure from, say, her patio to the incline of where the arrays are going to be at their highest height? What's the math on that?
This,
Distance.
the height or the
height? Is it height
Site
distance?
where
No, I haven't done it because we didn't shoot a backyard, but as I mentioned, there's about, from the wall behind your home,
Yeah.
if your home's flat, if your lot is flat, if we just take that, because that's the best number I can give you. 90, so that's about elevation 690, this is elevation at the top is about
That's all we can do. We can
730,
only
so
do
it's
from
about
ground level.
40
We
feet.
can't legally require it.
40
to do
feet. Is
15,
that including the
20
height of the
feet.
No,
array?
then you'd
Second
add
floors
another
of houses,
8 to 10
So we're
feet.
looking at
Local
50
authority.
feet.
So we need a fence that's going to cover that. An 8-foot fence is
Right.
not, a 10-foot fence is not gonna do anything. We're gonna see,
Are you doing any grading?
we're gonna see more
lower
than.
the
Excuse me,
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
wait a minute, we got too many people speaking at the moment. All right. You had the floor in the back.
I'll pass it on to my mom.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if the array is going to be 40-plus feet with solar panels on top of the 40 feet,
Well,
A
that's
10
the hill, the hill is 40 feet tall, that's
a
there
10,
today.
a 10, and of course the solar panels are gonna be on top of that.
That's correct.
What are you gonna say, 2 feet solar panels or 8-foot solar panels?
Well, no, we're talking about the front and the back, that's what the description is, so the front's
Yeah.
what, 2 to 3 feet, and the back's 8 to 10 feet off the
Yeah.
front.
Okay.
So a 10-foot fence is not gonna do anything for us. That's gonna be a quarter of the whole height of the array. We're gonna see the whole thing, basically.
And the
And-
light is going to be refracted into.
All right, at this time, what I wanna do is, first we're gonna determine the length of the fence. I wanna get that done now before we determine the height of the fence. All right, so we've agreed, has everybody agreed to where the fence is gonna start and stop?
We've marked it, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
That's been marked, all right. Now, I'm gonna ask the board. We've got a person who would like to see a 10-foot fence. And in the past, we've always had anywhere from 6 to 8-foot fences.
Wolfenden's was 8, sorry, to,
I don't recall off
Recall.
the top of my head, it was either 8 or 10.
okay.
I want us to discuss the reality of what height we're gonna request that this fence be made. Any comments? I know from her house, the property line is like 40-something
Feet.
feet.
40
Is-
feet there, but how far, how many feet? Are you talking
No,
40
sti-
feet?
Her
lengthwise.
house,
40 feet,
she
okay,
Right.
has, from her backyard to the property line,
okay,
is approximately 40-something feet.
okay.
At that 40-something feet, are we gonna go with a 10-foot fence? Or are we gonna go with an 8-foot fence?
Okay, my question is, the arrays are button right up against that line, so
No,
you're
they're
saying?
27 feet off the property line.
Okay,
So if
Close.
theoretically, it's like 60 some odd feet. She's-
If I may, where her home is,
Yeah.
the actual panels are on the order of 50 to 70 feet from the property line,
okay.
but
So
up
it's
in some
over.
areas, they're down as little as.
Excuse me, but the hill that goes up is 40 feet at the highest, so
I
10-foot
know.
fence is not gonna do anything.
I don't think you're gonna actually see, I mean, you're gonna have to actually look up more.
Yeah.
When
No.
when you're standing at normal height level,
No, you're
unless
not.
No,
Wait a minute,
look
wait a
at
minute,
the
wait a minute,
picture.
wait a minute.
It could, you could see
She-
it right
It's erroneous
there, it's
comment.
right there, right
Excuse me,
in,
ma'am, excuse me.
oh my god.
Patty is speaking at the moment.
That's the same question I'm having.
Yeah, but I'm like, where if you're standing, cause at a normal person's height when you're staring, you're
Ma'am,
gonna be looking
please,
at
let
the
her
top of the
speak and then you
fence.
can respond.
Or, I mean, cause they're so far away, and I'm just, when you're standing there and you're looking straight ahead, most people don't stand there and look like this. There's only, and I'm just thinking about reasonableness, because we have to factor that in, we have to make a reasonable decision.
Can I show you the picture? So you get an idea. This is my grill. That's the end of my patio. That's the stone wall. That's 15 feet.
Yep.
I'm standing here. You look right up. This is me standing here. I don't have to look up.
And the
I'm
fence
looking
would
You're gonna
be-
have a 10-foot
And where's the
fence
fire,
right
you have
there.
a fence.
Is there gonna be a
fence.
10-foot fence
So
or
a
an
10-foot
8-foot
fence then?
This is a
We decided
40-foot
on that?
grade going up.
Be a 10
That's
feet.
what the engineer just said. That's 40 feet up. A 10-foot fence is not gonna block 8 foot or whatever it is on top of 40 feet. Do you see what I'm saying? You don't have to look up like this. You look straight ahead and it's right there.
All right, this is what I wanna say. Okay, this is my opinion. The board can voice their opinion. We're trying to accommodate you with some type of a fence that will screen you from staring at the solar farm. I find it very hard to visualize something 40 feet up in the air that you now want to try to block. I find it hard to say that this gentleman is required to make a 20-foot fence, 15-foot fence. I
Well, why
find it
should
hard.
we have to
It's,
endure?
no, wait a minute, I've got the floor at the moment. I just find it hard to accept that. He's trying to accommodate you for your privacy, so that you're accommodating. I
don't think it's accommodating because it's a 10-foot fence is not going to, we might as well not have any fence at that point because we're just gonna see the whole thing. It's not accommodating.
I don't know how.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Yes.
Because this comes up in other projects, and I'd like to give the same general comment. First of all, I think the 10-foot fence is, at the request of the 10-foot, is reasonable. I think the color, the design, the arborvitae, it's all very reasonable, and we will, if we finalize it, we will properly ensure through Graves Engineering it's put in right, and all that important stuff. People often say, I don't want to see something. It's a solar field, people done this before, this is the 14th one we've reviewed. We get it from other projects, but your hands are tied to a certain degree. What you're allowed in Massachusetts under site plan review is to try to mitigate through normal fencing, normal design. You can't legally force them to do more than about 8 or 10 feet. We had a project from Nature's Classroom, if you recall, and people wanted fencing to go 20 feet high. People wanted to not see anything entirely. And given topography of property and abutting people, you don't have the legal right to force anybody to require their project be 100% blocked. I know that doesn't make people happy, but the best you can do is routine. So if you're standing in a routine location, you're blocked, and I realize in other locations, maybe on a deck, maybe on a different part of a property, you're gonna see it. But your hands are tied. You can only legally require what you're doing. If you went beyond this, they're going to appeal it and they're going to win. There's nothing there. You can only mitigate or lessen the situation. Property gets developed and people don't want to see it, but you really have no authority beyond requiring something that is of a routine size that improves the situation, but to 100% solve it, your hands are tied beyond a 10-foot fence and arborvitae. I understand the topographical difference. I understand they will still see it, but you don't have the legal right to require them to hide anything. It's just the way it is. So I think where you are right now is the proper design. You've gone from point to point to make sure it's the right location. Completely agree with the abutter's concern about what the design of the fence, color, the height, and the arborvitae, and I'd recommend that it be included as part of the approval. That's where we are. Might want to move into the portion where I can present some conditions for you to go into the details of how our engineer will manage everything and make sure week to week he, from Graves Engineering, is on top of what you approve gets properly installed in the field.
If I may, I just have one last question.
Sure.
I was selective hearing on a comment you said. However, you said that the legal right from the residents. is there a precedent for that?
Could you clarify? I'm not sure what you're asking. Could you say that again?
What, you said it's not 100% up to the planning board and the applicant to accommodate the residents, but is there anything beyond, like, is there a way you go about figuring exactly what the visual impact will be, like a percentage-wise?
I think he's more getting at the restrictive of how, like, site-wise,
To determine.
how strict can we be on
Yeah, like to
something?
determine how you go about.
Yeah.
That's what he's.
Yes.
What's the process?
It's evolved in Massachusetts through appellate court cases since the 1950s of how far a board can go in when people have appealed and gone over this in court over buffering. Plus, we get advice from the State Department of Housing and Community Development. When we started having the same concern on other solar projects, I talked to them and they confirmed what has been confirmed in court, and they recommend town by town. Normal level arborvitae, normal level fence.
So the visual impact is just, that's not involved. It's just they have a general
Right.
way of going about it. Okay.
Right, yes, exactly.
You answered my question.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'd like to close the public hearing, and then we'll take, comments from Alan, and we'll make a vote. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Alan, if you'd write up.
If I'd like to spend a few minutes walking the board through conditions and such, for your consideration. The first one is a standard condition that the board is approving your site plan permit for a period of 24 months or 2 years. That means the applicant must move forward within 2 years to get the building permit and complete the project. They have the right to ask for an extension, and it's routine, you put in every single permit, but it's obvious for this project, it's not gonna take 2 years, but it's required in it anyway. Second of all, prior to issuing a building permit from the building commissioner, the applicant will be required to receive a written notice to proceed to initiate field construction from the planning board or its staff. The notice to proceed is only issued by this office upon completion of an on-site pre-construction meeting that will include representatives of Waterman Design Associates, Nexamp, Graves Engineering on behalf of the planning board, the construction contractor also. Third, it's the policy of both the planning board and the building commissioner that no certificate of operation, either temporary or permanent, for the project shall be issued prior to the planning board or its agent signing the building commissioner's certificate of occupancy, and that signature will not move forward until all requirements and conditions of the site plan approval have been adhered to and completed. Fourth, the planning board has reviewed the final Graves Engineering report this evening dated January 29th, 2016, and hereby attaches it to the site plan approval as an addendum. Fifth, prior to the issuance of the building permit, the applicant will address comments number 8 and comments number 14, incorporating those final design items into the plan, and then I'll let the building commissioner know that it's all been complied according to Graves. 6, the applicant will comply with the requirements of the site plan construction inspection schedule that Graves Engineering will provide them at the pre-construction meeting. 7th, the applicant is required to construct, install, and get inspected. The fencing and the landscaping is finalized this evening, and I'll write right into that what Mrs. De Benedetto described in terms of height, color, wooden stockade, and we'll note from point to point of what was decided tonight on that. Next, performance guarantee. Again, you're required from the date of the issuance of the certificate of operation when you're completed with construction for a 12-month period to provide the planning board for the board's review at a board meeting and acceptance a performance guarantee in an amount determined by our engineer, guaranteeing for a 12-month period the landscaping. And thus, over that 12-month period, you're required under that guarantee to replace. Graves Engineering will inspect from time to time and make sure that it is taking hold of the arborvitae and that everything works out. Those are our standard reviews, and again, we'll provide to anybody the phone numbers. There's the building commissioner as part of this, there's our engineer, and we'd like from you, as you've done with your other projects, to give us, and we can share with anybody, the field construction people. I know Kevin Rabbit was the one for the other one. Is he on this one, or do we have someone different?
Unclear yet, probably,
Okay.
but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
I will will give you my opinion. Kevin is not only fantastic in working with anybody who is concerned who lives in a neighborhood, but he's a Charlton person. He's right here. If I'd recommend that you try to assign him to this. He
Yeah.
works well with us. He works well with neighborhoods. The Carpenter Hill Road people will attest. And I think it helps to have someone extremely local. He's a Charlton resident and he's an engineer.
Sure.
So it's a piece of advice, but we can't require that. So those are my recommended drafts for the board's consideration.
One recommendation, Alan.
Sure.
We talked about the building inspector for the land of the 5 acres.
Yep.
Oh, yes, that's
Data
one of the
commission.
2 things I cited when I said numbers.
Okay.
You're right, I didn't mention number 1 when I said that. I'd like to cull that one out as a separate condition and state, I'll restate what the referencing comment number 1 and state that the board is bringing to the building commissioner's attention
Yeah.
that concern stated by our engineer, and prior to the issuance of the building permit, he will review that. And it's his purview, his responsibility, and you're getting something from a title attorney, a title company that
Yes.
he would probably want to receive and go over.
We're working with
Yeah,
someone to
yeah.
nail it down.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
During the discussion of everything tonight, does anybody think of something that we may have forgotten at the last minute that we wanted to?
Just to clarify, Alan, it's a stockade fence on that, right?
That's what the applicant has requested, and I think it's reasonable.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
we've done it in the
Oh, the
past.
abutter, I should say, has requested.
We've done it in the past, I guess.
Alright, so we're gonna go with the 10-foot fence and
Mhm.
the color and the
Excuse me.
arborvitae's. We're in the middle of discussing something at the moment. Any other comments from the board at this time?
Nope.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion to accept the Griffin Road solar array farm as Alan has stated as conditions. Do I have a motion to accept it?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
About the arborvitae's, I want what's in my speech there.
Sure, completely right.
8-foot, dark American, no
Yeah.
farther apart than 4 feet.
Deer resistant too, there's a
Yeah.
deer resistant version of that.
Well, that's the dark American.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done this before and it's.
The whole length of the fence.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you, everybody, for your comments.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, have a good night, guys. Thank you.
We'll see ya.
Alright. It's well past 7:30. We have Alan, any comments on the Ellie Pond estate?
Oh, those 3, Mr. Chairman, are just annual extensions on 3 active permits. If we can take them one by one.
Sure.
Let me just get the files for the 3 from right here. The first one is the Ellie Pond subdivision, which is behind Kurt's house.
Yep.
It's the best way to describe it. The only thing left in there is phase 3, a last section they haven't built yet with about 3 house lots. So it's the annual extension request. Burton Engineering, Leslie Wilson represents the applicant and requested the extension to February 15th, 2017. I know they'd like to get in there this current building season, so.
Do I have a motion to accept the extension for the Ellie Pond project to February 15th, 2017?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The next one is site plan approval extension. Last year, you approved an application from Burton Engineering from Ralph Nichols, but on behalf of Miller Products, his tenant over at the industrial park on Route 20. They want to do a 4,000 square foot building expansion that because they're the tenant, Ralph Nichols as owner applied and he would add it on, and they haven't done it yet, so they asked for an annual extension to February 19th, 2017.
Do I have a motion to accept the annual extension permit for the project on Route 20 Industrial Park by Ralph Nichols to 2/14/2017?
So moved.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And the third one for extension is Hammond Woods, Tim Reardon's request to extend the ongoing approval of the definitive subdivision plan for the Hammond Woods subdivision to February 15th, 2017.
We have a letter here from Tim Reardon wishing to extend the Hammond Wood subdivision to 2/15/2017. Do I have a motion to accept the extension?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks. Thank you. Those are the three extensions for this evening. Put this one back up here.
Alan, at 7:45.
Catching up. Catching up.
Planning and zoning warranty articles you'd like to go over?
Yes, I'd like to give you the final draft language for the three planning board sponsored zoning items that we've gone over, and if the board's amenable, this is the exact technical way you'd actually change the bylaw, then you could vote to authorize Jane and I to submit for the warrant, and then we can schedule March and or April your public hearings. So the first one of the three is what specifically we changed in the bylaw to allow commercial self-storage facilities, the storage facilities in the CB and IG zone. And I'll just pass 2 in this direction and 4 in this direction. The warrant article would, to see if the town will amend the bylaw, you take the use table, which is section 3.2, and in the subsection for business uses, there are 23 business uses listed. We'll add a 24th line, because right now it's not in at all. I've looked at a whole bunch of Central Mass communities, and most of them use the phrase, 3-word phrase, commercial storage facilities. No one does a definition. There's no need to define it. It's a logical confirmation of what it is. If the building commissioner ever had anybody complain one way or the other about it, you use common sense, and he is able to do that. And then you add the usual line, the 7 district titles across the top. Not allowed in 5 of them. With the P, it's allowed by site plan review and community business, and with the IG zone by P also. And then that would take it from there. We do have 2 that people are interested in. Like I mentioned, Mr. McKissick has talked about doing one on some of his property, and Ralph Nichols is interested too. Both of those are IG. There's someone who says in his CB property, maybe someday he might be interested, maybe not. So he hasn't allowed me to put his name forward publicly because it's just an idea this gentleman has. But I think those 2 zones, as you've gone over in detail, make perfect sense, and I think site plan review will give a win-win for everybody's concerns to make sure that any actual ones that are proposed are well designed and an asset to the community.
Question, you're using the word commercial storage facilities? Now, are we talking about like the one that's up on Brookfield Road?
Yes,
the smaller
and they're
ones?
called that because it's a business.
Okay.
It's not
It doesn't
you-
mean for
right.
commercial items.
Right,
Okay.
it's not for commercial items. It's a business that someone provides storage facilities. Yeah.
Should you specify indoor storage?
People are doing this, no, it's not gonna happen. It's the building commissioner in all of these communities has used this language and confirmed it. There are no loopholes there.
So in other words, like I've noticed on Route 20 going through Auburn, there's an industrial storage
Yep.
Yep.
park. They also allow RVs and trailers
Yep.
in behind the fencing.
Correct.
So that would
Fall under that.
fall into that.
Absolutely.
But it'd be on the site plan review, so.
Oh, yeah.
it would-
Yep, you have site plan review. And the 2 types of zones you have, the locations are all along the highway.
Yep.
It's not in a residential neighborhood.
Okay.
You'll be in good shape.
Might apply to residential neighborhood.
Right.
Do we need to send this draft to any other department in town?
No, this is your purview.
Okay. Do you have a motion to have Alan draft this up?
This is the final draft.
Yeah,
I'd recommend you
for
submit, you sponsor it.
Yeah.
I did review it with the Economic Development Commission yesterday, and they'd be interested to support, as they've done in the past, of co-sponsoring it with you, and they voted that on Monday, they voted it.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
Yep. So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The second one, also I went over with the Economic Development Commission, and they voted that if you're willing to, they'd like to co-sponsor with you. It's the Village District, because it relates to planned economic development. What I recommend, because there's two different tweaks to the bylaw for Village District, I'd recommend you put them in one warrant article. It's a Village District related article with 2 items. So Jane was kind enough to highlight in yellow exactly what we're doing in it, 2 in this direction, 4 in this direction, and as we've discussed, first what you're doing is, we have an existing auction gallery line in the business use subsection of the use table, and currently, under the Village District, there's an N, not allowed, because when we created it several years ago, there was no interest at the time, and the board just only put in items that we were brainstorming that people were interested in and such. We allow auction galleries in a few other areas. We don't allow them in BEP at all, and we don't allow them in Village District. By adding a P, you allow it via site plan review instead of prohibiting it entirely. And what is initiating this was a request from Kenny LeBlanc, as he's working with Burton Engineering to design his facility down there that I keep calling the Southern Anchor, that will come in for site plan review. He's talking to people in Connecticut about possibly one of his tenants would be an auction gallery, and he's requested that you sponsor this. So I think you have a properly permitted design proposal coming before you that particular use would be very amenable in the Village District via site plan review. So you just all you're doing for the first of the 2 items in this warrant article is changing that N to a P to allow site plan review. The second one is very similar in terms of just making a letter change, literally. Our cluster residential subdivision is called, the official title is Flexible Development. And right now, in section 572, that first sentence says, a flexible development special permit shall be permitted on parcels of 10 acres or more in agricultural A, R40, and RSE upon issuance of planning board special permit, et cetera, et cetera. Adding a 4th one, and village districts would just allow the same residential cluster. And the reasoning, as we've discussed, just to summarize one more time, prior to the October town meeting, everything in violet was the location of the village district, and you weren't going to get any flexible cluster proposals. But now that you've added about 500 acres, the Millers and Overlook are very interested in, maybe someday, under their various ideas they could do, if they did cluster, they could have development, and they could also preserve open space as a balance for the character of the village. So that would allow that possibility to be considered.
I'd like to make a motion that we send this off. We co-sponsor the EDC for town meeting vote and approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The third one I did not discuss with EDC because it's not related to economic development. The third one, as you know, is the what you've been discussing on the residential livestock. I did forward it to both Matt Gagner and to Lisa. Lisa responded, I didn't hear back from Matt, but Lisa responded that she thought it was great, wanted to thank the board for your hard work. And again, language-wise, there's not much language to achieve what you're doing. What Jane highlighted for you is the existing use table. At the very beginning of our use table, these are the first 2 items that exist right now, and item number 1, the way it's written right now prior to changing it, refers to keeping of livestock on parcels over 5 acres, 2 on parcel less than 5, and right now on less than 5, you don't require site plan review. And what this would do is it would change it to the 2 and 2 that we talked about, and it's very simple. The only physical changes to the bylaw is in items 1 and 2, replacing the 5 acre yes or no to the 2 acre because it's more reasonable, and then adding the site plan review requirement in the residential, which is right now no site plan review at all. So this gives us the mechanism that Lisa and Ann were looking for, that from now on, after adoption of this, should it hopefully pass, in the future, for anyone new wanting to do livestock, because anybody previous is grandfathered under the old system. A residence of 2 acres or less with a house would require a site plan review, as you see in all the other communities, and you read a hearing tonight from Southbridge on. Anyone over the 2, it's allowed by right, which we felt was comfortable because it's more than 2 acres and shouldn't be as much of a nuisance. And I agree with what the board said at the last meeting, that we have to make it very clear in the initial presentation at town meeting what grandfathering is, what it affects, what it doesn't affect, because people can get confused, and I would hope it would pass, but you never know, because as Patty said, Charlton does have a heritage of people should be allowed to do what they want with livestock, which I agree with, but at the same time, it's an allowed use still. I'm not saying the planning board is determining whether you can do it or not. You're just making sure through a site plan review, proper location, not having excessive livestock on a small urban-style suburban house, just like every other community that we've contacted has. I haven't seen a community in Central Mass that doesn't have this. There might be 1 or 2 more that still don't. But we are very behind the times on these smaller urban-style house-size house lots of not having anything, but it's up to town meeting to adopt it.
And Peter's getting to the microphone and describing this.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to.
Like, we won't take away your chickens, we won't.
Yeah. And if you've got them, just got that pesky rooster, deal with the Board of Health, or the Animal Control Officer.
So you're saying with somebody with less than 2 acres, 2 acres or less,
Site plan.
it's, you need the site plan.
Yes, it's an
Right now, what do they need?
Right now, nothing. Right now, nothing at all.
They
they-
can do it, and.
Yeah, it's a Y, which
This
means
is very reasonable, very, I think.
Okay. So we're going from a Y to, we wanna take a look at it before
Yeah.
you bring in,
yeah. And there are communities that are more restrictive. There are communities that have gone the special permit, in which the planning board, or sometimes it's a zoning board that does it, has the right to say whether you can do it or not. We're not going that far because frankly, I don't see the need for it. It's more about doing it correctly. And I don't think anything of 5 acres or less would pass. The nature of Charlton, every community is different. And there are also communities that that get a lot more specific in the bylaw of saying you can't do certain types of residential livestock. We haven't altered that at all. So.
and we ended up with the 2 acres because that was a number somebody threw out, or?
Well, no, we ended up with the 2 acres because a combination of 2 things. Where there have been problems that Ann and Lisa brought to our attention has been 2 or less. Where we've had some problems in subdivisions that have come to our attention, like when we tried to accept our drainage system and someone without site plan review had set up a corral in the detention basin. The problems are occurring at the 2 acre or less subdivision size lot level. So it made sense to address what's really happening out there.
Okay. So you need more than 2 acres. I'm just thinking, to me, 2 acres is not a large piece of property. And you're saying that, yes, you can have these critters around on 2 acres or more.
2 acres or less.
2 acres or less, you need site plan.
Right.
More than 2 acres, it's allowed by right. That's what we're saying.
It's going from nothing to something, it's baby steps.
So I can't jump in and make it a big,
But if you have 2 acres and you're sitting in the middle of, some conservation land or whatever, and no one's near you, if you have a chicken coop, you have a chicken coop, so we would look at it as a permit, and we'd say that's very reasonable. If you're in the middle of a flexible, subdivision,
Right.
and you have neighbors, right, you can actually see in their windows, we might say,
When your
You're not gonna
Let's-
deny them, you're going to
maybe
possibly
buffalo isn't your.
possibly change where they're proposing the physical
Right.
location of the coop from one
Okay.
area of the backyard to a different area. You can limit the number of animals because it could be out of control in a small urban subdivision where the houses are cheek by jowl. So this
Right,
gives you,
that's-
you know, I mean, for other uses, for instance, we've had people say, it's such a small use, you're just gonna rubber stamp it, why do I have to come in? Because there are, in your case, we will be rubber stamping you, because in your particular case, everything's fine, so we get it done quickly. But in other cases of the exact same scenario, in other locations with other abutters, we could have problems, and that's why that particular land use needs to go through that type of site plan review.
Okay. Okay.
Do I have a motion to accept this as written with, is the ZBA is not gonna work with us on this.
No, this is a planning board site plan review.
Planning board second. I have a motion to accept this as read.
So move.
For the warrant.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jane and I will prepare those and get them to the warrant center.
Okay, pretty soon now we catch up to the 8:20. How about growth management?
Really quick, 3 items that are grocery list. One, we talked before, and I won't go into it again this evening, about the Mass DOT's Complete Streets program for potential sidewalks. So that's on your agenda for 2 weeks from this evening, February 17th, and Mike Andrade, our engineer, and Bill Scanlon, our consultant on the Path Grant, are on the agenda that night for Path Grant. So both of them have agreed to stay for this item so we can talk about Complete Streets, that program, because they're aware of it too, and we might work with them on it. And this is the handout when Bill Scanlon and I attended the state workshop. This is the PowerPoint handout, so I thought I'd give it to you to take home this evening as a reference and bring it back for the meeting. So that was one of the growth management items. Second, just an update, and Jean can add if she wishes, regarding the Housing Authority project at the center. We're setting up a meeting in the near future with the consultant the state recommended, that's very eager to meet with us, that you'd ultimately hire if you're comfortable with them. It's a 2-partner consulting firm that does the type of work that they put together the application for the funding to mass development, which would be proposing tax exempt financing and a tax exempt bond. And we really need that type of consultant. So Jean and I are at the point of meeting in the near future with that consultant and then moving it forward. And third, just want to spend about 2 minutes on the Ponican situation. I wanted to give you an update. First, just wanted to point out that I really want to commend, and I'm saying this knowing that we're on cable TV, I think it's worth people knowing. I really want to commend both Mike Mallett, Vice President of Hometown Bank, and the bank itself. You have a large 5-phase subdivision, Ponican. The developer unfortunately had financial issues, and a few years ago the bank foreclosed. Most banks on something that big would just let it sit until someday they can get somebody to flip it to. And the people who live in the first 2 phases would be living in perpetuity in a permanent construction site. The bank has authorized hundreds of thousands of dollars to rip up the Phase 3 roadway that the developers put in substandard and rebuild it. And that's what I wanted to give you this evening. I'm just going to hand you to take home 6 reports from the past 2 weeks, day to day, from Graves Engineering with photos for yourselves of what is being done out on that Phase 3 hillside. I think the bank is spending about $500,000. They're completely ripping up and taking out all of the stormwater drainage and all of the road and rebuilding it. And it is immense, and it is fantastic that they're willing to do that. And then Graves is inspecting it. It's going extremely well. And if you can each take one and just pass it along. The first one is January 27th report. And we're providing these to Hometown Bank also. The next one is January 26th. The next one is January 25th, January 22nd, January 20th, 5 days. Oh, and January 28th, I'm sorry. 6 days in the month of January that Graves was on site doing massive chunks of inspection as work is moving forward up there. And the result will be by springtime, Phase 3 will be in great shape, and they will have improved something that really give them credit. Here's the January 26th one. And here's the 25th, that's 3 so far. Here's the 28th, and not in any particular order.
We have 27th.
Here's the 22nd, and last but hardly least, the first one from the 20th. You probably just kept an extra.
Well, like every day.
Yeah, really.
25th and 28th.
And now the 20th is coming by. second item, I don't have a handout for you, is in the Ponacan subdivision. Jerry Foskett has had a concern out there, as we've talked about, and we went through that at the last meeting, regarding fixing a drainage item. And if you remember at the last meeting, they made 4 improvements to it on their property, and Jerry would like them to do another improvement within the public right-of-way related to that Phase 5 temporary drainage outlet that's sitting there till they build the Phase 5 road. So Mike Mallett has agreed to meet with Jerry and with the bank's contractor in the field in the near future, finalize everything he wants in the public right-of-way, and authorize his contractor to do the work, with Jerry being able to oversee it within the public right-of-way. So, to sum up, Ponacan is getting back online, and it's all to the bank's credit. Really have to give them credit.
Yeah, 'cause a lot of banks just sit on something.
And last, before just a few minor housekeeping items, again, on your next agenda is the solar project at 53 City Depot Road, addressing that steep driveway redesign requirement for the drainage problem. And here is Mike Andrade's summary dated today of how he reviewed their initial proposal from their new engineer, and says, your initial proposal needs a lot more detail and a lot more information. And I talked to Brendan Gove today, and Brendan said, we will prioritize this over the next week and a half, and I will be at your next meeting, hopefully with a Graves review report that it makes sense and we can finalize that adjustment. So I'll give these 5 and 1 for Jane.
Thank you.
And those are my growth management items, Mr. Chairman.
Now, this one, they're bringing in a whole new crew.
Yes, they've changed contractors, they've changed engineers. The new engineer is very good, but what he initially designed, Michael is saying, I need a lot more information and I want some more additional design items, because it's a very steep driveway, and he's not satisfied with the initial proposal.
Now, are they accessing that from the backside, like, at all?
They were for a while, but not anymore as far as I know. That was a very temporary period
Okay.
of employees parking back there.
Okay.
But I think they're well beyond that now. I think they can get in from the front. It's just getting the front properly designed for drainage, and then finalizing the actual cuts and fills and the surface, and that's what the redesign is all about.
Okay.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of our like solar pumps like 2.5. And a couple that we read tonight from a budding towns were like 10.
Yeah.
Those are huge.
Yeah, there's a couple of massive ones out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The new ones are getting smaller because National Grid wants them smaller and broken up, which is interesting.
All right.
Yeah, isn't it 0 Point that's doing Treasure Valley, Rutland?
I think that's Nexam. That's Nexam.
Yeah, they did
Okay,
that.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Alan, these are extras.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Hold on.
Thanks.
Hey, anything on,
I've just got a handful of quick housekeeping. I thought I'd walk in tonight. We had a certified mailing serving the other day. Just no reason to delay it for the next meeting. A Chapter 61 land release. You signed an A&R for Jason Du Bois. He did on behalf of Mrs. Nyland for 2 lots
Yeah.
that Jason's buying. Mrs. Nyland had the 2 house lots that are now created in 61A. So her attorney, Nancy Coderre from Southbridge, served the Selectmen, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, and assessors as required under the state 61A tax law with a request to release it. So the Selectmen asked for comments from assessors, Planning Board, and Conservation, and I'd recommend that we give him the standard comment that we have no objection to the release from the tax classification. And then he will pay back as you know, there's a tax repayment to the town for deferral accrued.
Yep.
Do I
No
have a
comment.
motion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we, no comment.
Thanks. Yep. No
Second.
comment motion, Yep, exactly.
Can I make a no comment, no?
That's
motion?
right.
Any other planning board business? you'd like to
Really
discuss?
quickly, just a couple heads up. Burton Engineering through Leslie Wilson is designing, and it'll come in at some point sooner than later, the filing for the Gunter property on North Side Road, which will be from the zone change last October. So there'll be one conventional designed lot fronting on Northbridge, and 4 large reduced frontage, so of each at least 5 acres, with 2 common driveway proposals for 2 lots for one, 2 lots for the other. So you'll end up with 5 houses where you could have had a much larger subdivision, so it's a nice balance of developing at that location behind the fitness center toward the neighborhood and preserving some land back there. I'll have on your next agenda, Jane and I will put in your packet final drafts for your annual report for 2015 to review at your next agenda that's due at the end of the month. And also my annual memo to you on projected planning board related development coming up for 2016 that you finalize and then share with other wings of town government. Some other site plans that are coming up in design phase. As soon as possible, probably in the next 2 to 4 weeks, we will receive the Nichols Industrial Park revision submittal that we discussed previously. So that's moving on a front burner because he wants to build the industrial park starting this spring. He actually had a pre-construction meeting last week with us because legally under the previous permitting, because he's just changing some interior stuff through a revision, he can move forward now. So we had a pre-construction meeting last week, and we'll allow him to do some clearing under Graves Engineering supervision now. Again, a reminder that on Saturday, March 19th, the annual Citizen Planner Training Collaborative Conference at Holy Cross. I'm definitely going. When we get some registration information, we'll forward it to you. Patty and Gina have gone in the past. Any board members can go. It's a very informative statewide planning board member and planning director conference for the day. We're finalizing a spreadsheet that we'll send to you. That spreadsheet's out to track the inventory of the solar projects. So this will be the 14th one. We're adding on it tonight. We'll get it to you probably in your next packet, and then we'll update it as time goes by. What we're looking at so far from the amount of megawatt you've approved through this evening under the current tax rate, that give or take a few thousand, that translates into over $440,000 worth of annual tax revenue to the town for these projects with no school impact.
Yes.
We also gave you this evening, we got back from the printer, the updated zoning bylaw book. It has a date November 2015, it has an orange cover, and that's the updated bylaw.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I've got 2 other quick items. One, very quickly, just to let you know, there's one, as you know, probably landowner expected zoning map revision from Ron Gothia for his residential idea. Jason Du Bois has met with me, and he's hiring Jason to handle the warrant article for him, which I think is good because Jason has done that from when he worked at Burton Engineering. So I'll work with Jason to provide him with some suggested wording, and Jason will submit it on his behalf, and then when it comes to us after it's submitted, we can schedule the public hearing on that one.
Did that make it to the May warrant?
It will, yes. He talked to me last week, and I gave him the deadline date, and I also reminded him that this board has urged his client to have a neighborhood meeting as soon as possible. If he saves it for just your hearing, then if everyone comes in angry that night and it's the first time they've learned about it, your policy has always been for a zone change what the neighborhood wants. That is the point where they can have an influence. And if he wants to avoid that scenario, work with the neighborhood. Get them on board, show them what's going on, because, you know, to promise things when, if you've got 15 people in the room who don't want it and he's the only one who wants it, this board's policy has always been, well, this isn't what the neighborhood wants for a change, we're supporting it. So, he said he definitely advised his client that they follow that strategy, so. And last, they've asked me again not to name publicly, but there is a manufacturing project being designed coming up for site plan review, and they've asked me just to hand out to you some background information as they head toward preparing site plan review through McClure Engineering. So,
Thank you.
pass to them. And those are my items, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Jane in our packet had given us some minutes to go over.
Yes.
I'd like to do a couple of them if possible tonight, maybe all of them. If we could look at the November 18th, 2015. Any questions on November 18th minutes? Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as read?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
If we can take the December 9th one?
Make a motion to accept as presented.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can we look at the January 20th?
January 6th.
I'm sorry, yeah, January 6th. Any comments on January 6th minutes?
Make a motion to accept for those submitted.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can we look at January 20th? questions on the January 20th?
Make a motion to accept.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The other two will have to go into executive session too. All right, anything else on the agenda for tonight from the board members?
Nope.
Alan, anything you'd like to
No,
make?
thank you. We're all set.
Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to adjourn and go into executive session. I'd like to make a motion under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Number 2. Go into executive session and come out, and this will conclude tonight's public planning board meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.